The mining colony of Kepler, 442b, was never meant to be beautiful. Its red soil stretched endlessly under twin suns that painted everything in shades of rust and amber, while massive extraction machines carved geometric scars into the landscape. The air recyclers hummed constantly, fighting to maintain breathable atmosphere in the prefabricated domes that housed 3,000 human souls at the edge of known space. It was a place where dreams came to die, where corporate contracts bound families to decades of servitude, where children grew up knowing they would likely never see Earth. But 8-year-old Marcus Chen had never seen Earth anyway, so Kepler 442b was simply home. He pressed his nose against the reinforced glass steel of his family's habitat module, watching the morning shift workers trudge toward the extraction sites. His breath fogged the window as he traced patterns in the condensation, drawing spaceships and stars and all the wonders he'd seen in the educational hollows. Outside, a transport crawler rumbled past, its massive treads churning red dust into spiraling clouds. "Marcus, come eat your protein paste," his mother called from the tiny kitchen alcove. Sarah Chen had been the colony's chief xenobiologist for 6 years now, ever since the Astromining Consortium had discovered that Kepler 442b wasn't quite as lifeless as initial surveys suggested. Her work studying the strange crystalline formations that occasionally surfaced during deep excavations had earned their family a slightly larger habitat and better food rations, but it was still a far cry from the academic career she'd dreamed of on Mars University.
"In a minute, Mom," Marcus replied, not moving from the window.
Something was happening at the main gate. The usually routine morning routine was disrupted by a commotion he couldn't quite make out from this distance. Security vehicles were converging on the entrance to the colony, their warning lights painting the morning air in urgent reds and blues. His father, Engineer First Class David Chen, emerged from the small workshop where he'd been repairing atmospheric recyclers since before dawn. His coveralls were stained with coolant fluid and his dark hair was streaked with grey despite being only 35. The harsh environment of the mining colony aged people quickly. "What's all the noise about?" David asked, joining his son at the window. His weathered hands, scarred from years of mechanical work, rested on Marcus's shoulders. "Something's happening at the gate," Marcus said, pointing toward the distant commotion. "Look, there are medical units too." Through the reinforced glass, they could see the white emergency vehicles racing across the colony's main thoroughfare. The sight was unusual enough to draw other residents to their windows. In a place where every day brought the same routine of mining, processing, and survival, any deviation from the norm was cause for concern. The family's communication unit crackled to life with the voice of Colony Administrator Voss. "All residents, please remain in your habitats until further notice. We have a situation at the perimeter that requires immediate medical and security response. This is not a drill. I repeat, all civilians are to remain in their quarters until the all-clear is given." "Crash transport?" David speculated, though they all knew that the regular supply runs weren't scheduled for another 2 weeks. "Could be equipment failure at one of the outer mining sites," Sarah suggested, though her voice carried an edge of worry that she tried to hide from her son. Marcus continued watching through the window, his 8-year-old curiosity stronger than any adult's caution. That's when he saw them. The figures moving near the gate weren't human. At first he thought it might be a trick of the light, the way the twin suns sometimes created strange shadows and distortions in the distance. But as the group moved closer to the main colony buildings, there was no mistaking what he was seeing. Tall, graceful beings that seemed to flow rather than walk, their movements so fluid they appeared to be dancing across the rough terrain. Even from this distance, Marcus could see that their skin had an opalescent quality that shifted colors in the morning light. "Dad," Marcus whispered, his voice tight with excitement and fear, "those aren't people." David squinted through the glass steel, following his son's pointing finger. When he saw what Marcus had spotted, his engineering-trained mind immediately went to practical concerns. "Sarah," he called to his wife, his voice carefully controlled. "You might want to see this." Dr. Sarah Chen had spent her entire career hoping for this moment. Every xenobiologist dreamed of first contact, of being the human who would make history by encountering alien intelligence. But standing in her tiny kitchen with a bowl of protein paste cooling in her hands, watching through a scratched window in a corporate mining colony at the edge of nowhere, she felt only a cold dread settling in her stomach. The aliens, because there was no other word for what they were seeing, moved with purpose toward the colony's medical facility. They carried something between them, their elongated forms bending and swaying in coordination, that spoke of either technological enhancement or an entirely different evolutionary path than humanity had taken. What they carried appeared to be one of their own kind, though smaller and clearly injured. Medical emergency, Sarah murmured, her scientific mind automatically cataloguing details. They're seeking help. Should we report this? David asked, though they all knew that every word spoken in their habitat was likely being monitored by the consortium's security systems anyway. Before anyone could answer, the communication unit crackled again. This time it was Chief Medical Officer Dr. Reeves, his usually calm voice tight with stress. Dr. Chen, please report to Medical Bay 7 immediately. Bring your xenobiology equipment and any theoretical xenophysiology references you might have. Priority Alpha authorization. Sarah set down the bowl of protein paste with hands that shook slightly. In 6 years on Kepler, 442b, she had never received a Priority Alpha call. Such authorizations were reserved for colony-threatening emergencies or discoveries that could fundamentally change humanity's understanding of the universe. I have to go, she told her family, already moving toward the storage locker where she kept her field equipment. Mom, what about the aliens? Marcus asked, still pressed against the window. What aliens, sweetheart? Sarah replied automatically, though her hands moved efficiently through her equipment checklist. Dr. Reeves probably just needs help with some unusual mineral samples. But Marcus wasn't fooled by his mother's casual tone. He had inherited her scientific curiosity, along with his father's stubborn determination, and at 8 years old, he had already learned to recognize when adults were trying to protect him from something important. The beings he had seen moving toward the medical bay weren't mineral samples, and everyone in the room knew it. David helped his wife gather her equipment, his engineering background making him efficient even in stressful situations. How long will you be gone? I don't know, Sarah admitted, sealing her equipment case. Maybe hours, maybe days. Just keep Marcus safe and inside until we understand what's happening. As she prepared to leave, Marcus pressed his face harder against the window, trying to catch another glimpse of the alien visitors. The security perimeter had expanded, blocking his view of the medical facility, but he could see the unusual energy signatures dancing across his toy scanner, a modified mining detector his father had reprogrammed to detect unusual geological formations. The readings were unlike anything in the device's database. Be careful, Mom, Marcus said as Sarah kissed the top of his head. I always am, little starfighter, she replied, using the pet name she'd given him when he was small and obsessed with the space combat games in the colony's recreational database. After Sarah left, father and son remained at the window, watching the controlled chaos unfolding across their small world. The Astromining Consortium's security forces had established a perimeter around the medical facility, but their posture didn't suggest hostility. If anything, the personnel Marcus could see appeared to be providing assistance, bringing equipment and supplies toward the building where the aliens had disappeared. Dad, do you think they're friendly? Marcus asked. David considered the question with the careful pragmatism that had kept him alive through 15 years of dangerous industrial work. I think they came here asking for help, son. That suggests they at least understand cooperation. But what if they're not from around here? What if they're from really far away? Then your mother is about to make history, David replied, though his voice carried undertones of worry that he couldn't quite hide. Hours passed. The twin suns climbed higher, turning the red landscape into a furnace of heat and light. Normal colony operations had ground to a halt as everyone waited for word about their unexpected visitors. The communication channels remained mostly silent, carrying only routine maintenance reports and shift schedules that everyone knew were meaningless in the current situation. Marcus had given up his vigil at the window and was building spacecraft models from recycled component parts when the door chimed announced his mother's return. She entered looking exhausted but with an expression of wonder that transformed her usually practical features into something almost luminous. How did it go? David asked, embracing his wife. We saved her, Sarah said simply. But the words carried weight that spoke of hours of desperate medical intervention. A young alien female badly injured in what appears to have been an accident during some kind of exploration or research mission. Her people, they call themselves the Etherians, had been watching our colony from a distance, trying to decide if we were worth making contact with. And, Marcus asked, abandoning his model spacecraft. When she was injured, they had to choose between letting her die or taking a chance on human medicine. They chose to trust us. Sarah's voice carried a mixture of exhaustion and amazement. Marcus, she's about your age. In their species, that means she's considered an adult by their standards. But she's still curious about everything, still eager to learn and explore. The implications of that statement settled over the small family like a blanket. First contact with an alien species was momentous enough, but the fact that it had happened through an act of medical mercy rather than conflict or formal diplomatic protocol suggested possibilities that no one had dared to imagine.
"Can we see her?" Marcus asked. Sarah looked at David, a silent communication passing between them.
"Actually," she said slowly, "she asked to see you, Marcus. Apparently, she watched you through the medical bay windows while we were working on her. She's never seen a human child before, and she's curious about what you do for fun." The next day, under carefully controlled conditions and with more security protocols than had ever been implemented in the colony's history, Marcus Chen found himself walking into Medical Bay 7 to meet the first alien being humanity had ever encountered.
Her name was Lyrelay, though the actual pronunciation involved harmonic frequencies that human vocal cords couldn't reproduce. She was tall for her age, nearly Marcus's height despite being equivalent to an 8-year-old by her species' developmental standards.
Her skin shifted through subtle color variations, pale blues and greens and silvers that seemed to respond to her emotions or thoughts. Her eyes were larger than human eyes, with irises that contained depths of color like looking into a nebula. When she saw Marcus, she made a sound that the translation device interpreted as laughter, though it was more like crystalline chimes being struck by a gentle wind. "You build flying machines," she said through the translator, her actual voice a series of musical tones that somehow conveyed meaning, even without technological assistance. She was looking at the toy spacecraft Marcus had brought to show her. "Just models," Marcus replied, suddenly shy. "My dad helps me make them from broken mining equipment." "On my world, we grow our flying machines," Lyrelay said, settling onto the medical bay's floor with fluid grace. "They are alive. Would you like to see?" She reached into a small container that her people had provided and withdrew what looked like a seed made of living light. As she cupped it in her hands, the seed began to expand and reshape itself, growing into a miniature spacecraft that moved with organic fluidity. Tiny wings beat like those of an insect, and the craft's hull pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Marcus's eyes went wide with wonder. "It's alive? Everything we make is alive," Lyrelay explained. "We do not build machines.
"We partner with living things that choose to help us. This little one wanted to fly, so we help it become the best flying creature it can be."
They spent the next hour sharing their different approaches to technology and play. Marcus showed her his collection of model spacecraft, each one carefully crafted from salvaged components and painted with designs inspired by the adventure stories in the colony's entertainment database. Lyrelay demonstrated several living technologies, tools that grew and adapted to their users' needs, devices that could repair themselves, and toys that responded to emotional states with changes in color and behavior. But it was when Marcus showed her his drawings that something truly special happened. "This is my family," he said, presenting a sketch he'd made on his personal tablet. The drawing showed 3 figures standing outside their habitat module, with the mining colony's distinctive architecture in the background. "That's my mum. She studies rocks and weird stuff. That's my dad. He fixes things. And that's me." Lyrelay studied the drawing with intense focus, her skin cycling through several color patterns that the medical team had learned to associate with deep thought.
"You draw your family together," she observed. "This means they are important to you." "Of course they're important," Marcus said, not understanding why that would be unusual.
"They're my family. We take care of each other. My people do not have families like this," Lyrelay said quietly, her skin settling into softer blues and greens. "We are born from the living ships, and we are raised by the community. I have never had a mother and father who belonged only to me." The loneliness in her voice was unmistakable, even filtered through the translation device. Marcus, with the instinctive empathy of childhood, reached out and took her hand. Her skin was warm and seemed to pulse gently under his touch.
"You can share my family," he said simply. "While you're here, my mum and dad can take care of you too." Lyrelay's skin brightened to colors that the medical staff had never seen before. Golds and warm silvers that seemed to glow from within.
"You would do that? For someone who is not like you?" "You're hurt and far from home," Marcus replied. "That's what families do. They help people who need help." It was at that moment, with the innocence and absolute certainty that only children possess, that Marcus made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. "When I grow up," he said, looking directly into Lyrelay's nebula deep eyes, "I'm going to marry you. Then you'll always have a family." The translation device struggled with the concept for a moment, cycling through various interpretations before settling on the closest Etherian equivalent. What emerged was not exactly marriage as humans understood it, but rather a concept that implied permanent partnership, shared existence, and the willing binding of two lives into a single destiny. Lyraleigh's skin erupted into a symphony of colors that made the medical bay's instruments register energy readings they had never detected before. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that needed no translation. If you mean this promise, Marcus Chen of the human people, then I accept. When we are both grown, I will bond my life to yours, and you will never be alone in the vast spaces between stars. Neither child understood the magnitude of what had just transpired. They were simply two young beings, each from a different world, making the kind of promise that children make without considering the impossibility of keeping it. But this promise was different. This promise would be remembered. This promise would reshape the galaxy. As the days passed and Lyraelai healed, the two children became inseparable. They shared stories of their worlds, learned each other's games, and developed a friendship that transcended species barriers. The adult members of both civilizations watched in fascination as these two young beings created a bridge between worlds through nothing more than curiosity, kindness, and the unshakable belief that differences were meant to be celebrated rather than feared. When the time came for Lyraleigh's people to take her home, both children were heartbroken but resolute. They had made a promise, and they believed in it with the absolute faith that only children possess. I will wait for you, Lyraelai said as she prepared to board the living ship that would carry her back to the stars. No matter how long it takes, no matter how far I have to travel, I will wait for you to come find me.
I'll come, Marcus promised, holding her hand until the very last moment.
When I'm grown up, I'll build the fastest ship in the galaxy and come marry you. I promise. The Etherian ship departed Kepler 442b on a course that would take them beyond the mapped regions of human space, leaving behind only memories and a promise made by two children who believed that love could overcome any obstacle the universe might place between them. 20 years would pass before Marcus Chen would understand just how impossible his childhood promise had been to make, and 25 years would pass before he would prove that impossible promises are simply promises that haven't found the right person to keep them. 20 years had transformed Marcus Chen from the wide-eyed boy who made impossible promises to one of the most dangerous men in human space. Not dangerous in the way of criminals or warlords, but dangerous in the way that only true believers could be. The kind of person who would reshape reality, rather than accept that their dreams were impossible. 442b mining colony had been his launching point, but it had never been his destination. From the moment Lyraleigh's ship disappeared into the star-filled darkness, Marcus had begun preparing for a journey that everyone told him was impossible. His childhood promise had become the organizing principle of his entire existence, the gravitational center around which every decision, every sacrifice, every moment of his life had orbited. Now, standing in the command center of the research station he had built in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, Marcus looked nothing like the mining colony child he had once been. 2 decades of relentless self-improvement had transformed him into something that seemed barely human. His body had been enhanced with the best biotechnology that money and determination could buy, muscles that never tired, bones reinforced with crystalline matrices, reflexes boosted to inhuman levels. His mind had been expanded through neural interfaces that allowed him to process information at rates that made conventional computers seem sluggish. But the most significant change was in his eyes. The wide-eyed wonder of childhood had been replaced by the focused intensity of someone who had stared into the infinite complexity of the universe and decided to master it rather than be mastered by it. When Marcus Chen looked at a problem, reality itself seemed to bend slightly under the weight of his attention. Dr. Chen. We have the final reports from the probe fleet, announced Dr. Jenner. Elena Vasquez, his chief of xenoarchaeological research. She was one of the brightest minds humanity had ever produced, a woman who had given up a tenured position at Lunar University to join Marcus's seemingly impossible quest. Her decision had been influenced not by money, though Marcus paid extraordinarily well, but by the mathematical elegance of his theoretical framework for interdimensional navigation and the quiet intensity with which he pursued his goals. Display the compilation, Marcus replied, his voice carrying undertones of harmonics that he had learned from studying Etherian communication methods. The years had taught him that language was just another system to be optimized, and he had optimized his own speech patterns to carry maximum information density while remaining comprehensible to human listeners. The holographic display that materialized in the center of the command room was a 3-dimensional map of explored space,
that represented 20 years of the most comprehensive xenoarchaeological survey in human history.
Red markers indicated locations where Marcus's probe fleets had discovered traces of Etherian passage, fragments of living technology, crystalline formations that matched samples Lyra had left behind, energy signatures consistent with their biotechnological approach to space travel. The map told a story that would have discouraged anyone but Marcus.
The Etherian civilization was nomadic, their living ships following migration patterns that spanned not just star systems but entire galactic arms. They existed in a state of constant movement, never remaining in one location long enough to establish permanent settlements.
Following their trail was like trying to track the wind itself. Possible in theory, but requiring resources and patience that exceeded the capabilities of any normal human endeavor. Marcus had spent the first 5 years after Lyrale's departure acquiring those resources.
His parents had watched in amazement as their son transformed from a creative child into a focused learning machine. Marcus had absorbed every educational program the colony had available, then convinced the Astro Mining Consortium to give him access to their corporate databases.
By the age of 14, he had completed university-level studies in xenobiology, theoretical physics, and interstellar economics. By 16, he had earned advanced degrees through remote learning programs that connected him to institutions across human space. That education had been only the beginning. Marcus had recognized early that finding Lyrale would require resources that no corporation, government, or university would willingly commit to what they saw as a childhood fantasy. So he had set out to acquire those resources himself. His first breakthrough had come from an unexpected source: the living technologies that Lyrale had demonstrated during her time in the medical bay.
Marcus had convinced his mother to share her detailed scans and recordings of the Etherian biotechnology, then spent 3 years reverse engineering the principles behind their living machines. The result had been a series of patents for adaptive nanotechnology that could self-repair and evolve to meet changing requirements.
The biotechnology industry had been revolutionized almost overnight. Marcus's adaptive systems were so far beyond anything human science had previously achieved that they seemed almost magical. Manufacturing, medicine, space exploration, environmental restoration. Every field that touched technology was transformed by devices that could grow and adapt rather than simply follow programmed instructions. By the age of 21, Marcus Chen was one of the wealthiest individuals in human space. But wealth had never been his goal. Wealth was simply a tool for acquiring the real resources he needed. "Show me the probability matrices for the Vale Nebula sector," Marcus commanded, and the display shifted to show a complex web of mathematical projections. Cross-reference with the temporal analysis of their migration patterns and the gravitational models from the helix conjunction.
Dr. Vasquez manipulated the controls with practiced efficiency. She had spent 10 years learning to interpret the data streams that Marcus generated, and she understood that his requests were never random. Everything connected to everything else in his analysis systems, creating prediction models that bordered on prescience. The probability matrices suggest a 73% likelihood that the Etherian fleet passed through this region within the last 5 years, she reported. The temporal analysis indicates they would have been following the stellar wind patterns toward the Andromeda junction points. Insufficient precision, Marcus replied, his enhanced mind already processing alternatives faster than normal human consciousness could follow. Dr. Kim, what's the status of the dimensional resonance scanner array? Dr. James Kim, his theoretical physics specialist, consulted his own displays before responding. The array is operating at 97% efficiency across 47 monitoring stations. We're detecting quantum signatures consistent with Etherian technology, but the signals are extremely faint and scattered across multiple dimensional frequencies. Marcus nodded, his expression unchanging despite the fact that the news represented a significant breakthrough. The dimensional resonance scanners were his greatest technological achievement, devices that could detect the quantum signatures left behind by Etherian living ships as they moved through space.